Good morning. Thank you for joining in on Microdosing group this morning. Something that has been on my mind as we're sitting in a state of a lot of unrest within our society and internationally right now is that our values are determined by the society that we're in. One of the things that has become very apparent if anyone is watching world news now or at any point in time, but especially now, is there's a lot of conflicts that are happening based on the fact that there's a lot of differences between societies. So when we look overseas, we see a society and cultures that are different than what's in the United States. And then even overseas, if you're looking at Asia versus Russia versus Europe, versus Africa or Australia, you're going to see a lot of differences between cultures in each of those areas and within North America. There's a lot of differences between the Hispanic cultures in Mexico and Central America than in the United States or even up in Canada, or Greenland. So, which is not part of America at this point in time for anybody that might be listening 50 years from now. So, but when we recognize that our values are based on the societies that we live in, we start to give more consideration to why we get wrapped up in the things that we get wrapped up in and why we respond to ourselves and people around us in the way that we do. So one of those ways that we talk about pretty regularly is relationships and relationships being transactional. The definition of a relationship, I actually looked it up in the Oxford Dictionary, is the way in which two or more concepts, objects, or people are connected, or the state of being connected. So we can have a relationship to other people, we can have a relationship to ideas, we can have a relationship with the environment that we live in. But all of those are based on the way in which they are connected and the way we regard or behave towards each other. So if we expand that back out to the recognition that our values are determined by the society that we're in, and we can take those down to even a smaller microcosms from a national society to home of origin, religious or political belief systems we've been raised in, ideas about holidays or the self or things that happen in a daily life, what success and our goals should look like. Those are all ideas that have been handed to us based off of the society that we're in, whether microcosm or macrocosm. So those relationships are planted in us at a very young age and continue to develop through the lifespan. One of the concepts that's starting to be discussed more now within Western culture is family estrangement or going no contact with family members. Oprah last November did, I don't know if it's a podcast or an interview, but did a discussion about that. And it's on YouTube for anybody that might want to watch it. But some estimates suggest that nearly a third of Americans are estranged from at least one family member. Just by using that term estrangement, though, I know for me, and this is where I'd love to have some conversation around this, we talk a lot about definitions and the ideas that are connected to those definitions in these groups. Estrangement has kind of a negative connotation to it. Oh, you're estranged. That sounds like a painful separation. You know, you're separate from something that you were told is supposed to be close to you. So if we have nearly a third of Americans who are having this feeling of, I should be close to this person, but I'm separate from them, think about the level of conflict that can come from that internally. Whether or not you have conflict in your daily life, as far as the behaviors, isn't necessarily what we're measuring, but internal conflict is what leads to a lot of the external stress and decision making that we end up having. So family estrangement is one piece of that. But if we're also having these internal conflicts about how we think life should look, how we think we should be showing up, then those types of ideas lead to exactly something we're talking about a little bit before we started recording group, and that is finding coping mechanisms to cover those up. Coping mechanisms can be alcohol, it can be marijuana, it can be shopping, it can be food, it can be over-exercising, under-exercising, working all the time. Anything that we use to distract the mind to cover things up from ideas that we feel uncomfortable with are where we can be experiencing this concept of estrangement. So right now we're in the beginning of June in 2026, summer. People are starting to get outside a little bit more, think I need to take a break from work or a break from school. Who do I want to spend time with? How do I want to spend my time? What does that look like? People start thinking I should be going on a vacation. Okay, there's money attached to that, there's travel attached to that. So let's have some conversation about these, I call them the shoulda, coulda, wouldas from the past, and then the ideas that we're sitting in right now of how we think we're supposed to be spending time within these various relationships that exist within our life with self, other people, the environment, career. What comes to mind for you guys this morning as I kind of just lay that out there?
Hmm. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I want to give other people a chance.
You're okay. Go ahead, Barbara. What's on your mind?
Oh, well, in a good way, you've hit a nerve in a good way. Um, I've been honing in on this topic of estrangement, in particular because my oldest daughter, who's 28, blocked me and has been no contact with me since mid-January. And it was about an incident that took place in my house between her and my youngest, who's 18, where she started to get aggressive. And because they were having a disagreement and like was wanting to push my son down the stairs. So I put up a hard boundary and just said, that's an absolute no. We don't do that in my house. We've never had that in my house. We're certainly not starting that now. And she felt I took my youngest side and that I wasn't listening to her and said some very ugly things via text and then was like, I'm blocking you. I was like, wow, okay. So that has hit hard. And to your point, it's an internal stressor. It's something I sit with. I didn't choose it. Um, I think as I've gotten healthier and have been doing therapy and the microdosing as of late, I'm clearer about my boundaries. I'm clearer about what's mine to own and what's not mine to own. And I think as I get more clear, she gets more upset with me because I don't handle things the way I used to, right? She has hurt in her life about different things that she wants me to step in and fix, like with her siblings. And I'm like, that's between you and your sister. I'm not part of that. They're all adults now. Um, and to, also state what you did, which is I've been in other kinds of support groups and realized that estrangement is kind of a sad reality. And I think in some cases, sometimes it's useful and necessary, and I get that. I think this younger generation, if I may over stereotype, they do a lot of cutting people off. I've noticed, like, when there were some differences in my extended family about who voted for whom and unhappiness about the vote, they blocked them. Like, wow, okay, that's that for now, at least. You block because you don't like that person's vote. That's different. Like, can we talk? And I'm not speaking to myself, but is there not a conversation? And that's how I feel with my daughter. Like, can we not converse about this? Really? That's where we are, that we have to just block. And I think, especially if there's addiction involved and or there's mental health issues, either that can be brought on by those things or be necessary because of those things. So I'm coming to terms with my own acceptance of things that are not within my control.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, I think each person has their experiences of what that kind of feels like and looks like. And I'm sure there's people in group today and others listening in that certainly resonate with a lot of what you shared. One of the two things that come to mind, the first one is that idea of blocking somebody can be really viewed as its own coping mechanism. Just
Mm,
like a
mm,
substance, just like a behavior, it is a behavior of this is uncomfortable for me and I don't want to face it and I don't want to deal with it. So I'm just going to kind of drop that iron curtain there. And now you can't say things to me that are uncomfortable or that I don't agree with. Or a little bit of that child ego state too of, you're not the boss of me and I'll show you that I don't have to listen to you. And, so probably a little bit of that coming in, especially when we look at the transactional aspect of relationships, and where those patterns of behavior are. But the other piece of that too is the societal belief system that is connected to the idea of family. If somebody does not have the title of mom, dad, sister, niece, nephew, we'll just use the title of family member, we have a much easier time separating ourselves from that individual. And I don't mean separating like blocking, but I do mean just allowing them to be them and not to have an impact on how we feel about ourselves. But particularly within American culture, and that's all I can speak to from personal experience. But if we're looking at American culture, there is a huge stereotypical societal expectation that the families look like Norman Rockwell paintings, and that's why we hang those paintings up, because that's an idea. Oh, isn't it fun that, the white picket fence is here and all the kids are around the Christmas tree here and mom and dad are smiling instead of thinking about the amount of credit card debt that they went in to so that kids could have this idea of Christmas with all these presents. And, we look at these ideas and say this is what we're supposed to want and what we're supposed to connect with. And then when our personal lives don't look like that, because again, we live in reality, not in ideas, then we decide there's something wrong with my reality and must be something wrong with me. Well, that's uncomfortable. So rather than deal with the definition, I'm going to block somebody or I'm going to distract my mind or I'm going to use something that shuts off that executive functioning and just not think about things, which never gets to the root of changing where the discomfort actually comes from. And it comes from the values that are handed to us and are inherited by the society that we live in. So exactly to your point, Barbara, that it's you allowing other people to make their own choices and determining that doesn't define anything about you, their choices don't, but it also doesn't define anything about you that they have made those choices. And that can be the harder thing to sit with sometimes. When a partner or a spouse or a child or a close friend even makes a decision that impacts us based off of the choices that they're doing, whether they're talking to us or not, what they're saying, what ideas they're handing to us, then when those are made, it's very easy for us to sit in a place of, well, that means something about me. I must not be a quote unquote good friend or good family member, or must not be capable of healthy relationships because this is what happened. Rather than questioning the idea or the definition of the relationship itself and how much power we're allowing it to have, and that being a choice.
that's really helpful and interesting. Thank you.
What other thoughts are coming to mind for you guys? Or who else wants to expand on that or even give a different perspective?
I'll speak. It's been probably 23 years now that my aunt, my dad's sister, started with him. She became estranged from him. She had married a man that was pretty much estranged from his whole family. And, I don't know exactly all of what goes on in her. Obviously, I don't know what goes on in her mind, but we all felt that her husband kind of pushed her to become estranged with my father. And then, eventually to the point where she's now estranged from every member of our family. It took 7, 8 years total before she lost pretty much contact with everyone. I do believe one of my cousins still hears from her maybe once or twice a year. Um, but the hurt that it caused my dad, my aunts, even myself, because no one ever really understood why she cut everyone off. Why, So it is very hard to understand that it wasn't you, if that makes sense. Especially since, she really just cut people off and didn't tell anyone why. Yeah. And there wasn't like a fight or this or that. It was just weird. So it's a weird concept to have to live with and deal with and, understand. Yeah.
How do you feel like you've started to work through some of that? Becky, what have been some things for you that you feel like have been helpful?
Um, for me, just realizing, well, I didn't really have anything to do with it. One day, my dad was no longer talking to my aunt, and she cut my brother and I off. At the same time, she still talked to other family members. And then slowly, but it was kind of like, well, obviously, it didn't really pertain to me necessarily. There was no discussion, there was no involvement. So I was always able to pretty much say, well, I mean, there was nothing I could do to change it. Just had to learn to accept it and understand that there was, wasn't anything I'd done. There was probably no real resentment towards me. I'm not sure where, the resentment may have been towards how they were raised. I mean, they did not have good childhood, but they'd always been very close, the five siblings. So, yeah. And then I know, like I said, to this day, it still really hurts my dad and his two sisters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You feel like that's changed anything for you and how you approach relationships with other people?
I
Something.
do. One thing I will say is it does make me, when there's conflict, work harder to resolve the conflict and try and understand the conflict. And even if you can't agree to disagree, find a place where you both can land instead of just cutting someone out of your life. I mean, I get where it can be healthy. I mean, there's definitely people out there that you probably don't want in your life and, that type of stuff. But then there's, do I always get along with my father? Do I agree with everything that comes out of his mouth? No. Have I learned to accept him as a person and allow his beliefs and my beliefs to be different and not fight with him over who he votes for or who what his new rant is, whether it's, yeah, whatever it is that he's gotten wrapped around his head this month. Um, I just kind of listen to it, nod my head, and most of the time don't even make a comment because it's just not worth it.
Right.
And I cherish our relationship way more than I do those 5, 10 minutes of him ranting about something that I don't agree with.
Right.
So for me, I think that's what it's done a lot of is help made me realize that there's a lot more to a relationship than the fact that we don't share the same point of view all the time. Yeah.
Absolutely. As someone who's been microdosing for a pretty extended period of time, off and on, and learned how to really utilize that tool, how do you feel like the microdosing has been helpful to you, whether directly with relationships or in other areas of your life? What have you noticed has changed?
Um, Definitely helps me not maybe probably the right word for me is kind of jump to conclusions or um, especially work related where someone sends out an email. I'm like, oh my God, really? What are you doing? Instead I'm like, I wonder what he's thinking. Let me ask some questions instead of just going off the deep end and being like, oh my God, that's the stupidest thing you've ever done. Why are you doing that? So it makes me kind of take a step back and think a little more
Yeah.
before I reach out. And then my correspondence doesn't set their defenses off, and we're able to communicate instead of kind of both being defensive and ready to, he's defensive, I'm irritated, type thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah,
So I think that has helped a lot. Yeah.
to your point exactly, that self-defensiveness is always, it's a self-protection.
Right.
Protection of our ideas of ourself, the ideas of what we hold on to as important and how we view ourselves. And so those emotional responses that can tend to creep in over time and be there always are coming from a place of interpretation of being valued or devalued. And being able to pause that emotional response and sit with it and respond differently allows the other person to also respond differently.
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, that's helped a lot in the last year and a half. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for sharing all of that.
You're welcome.
Anyone else thoughts or things that have come to mind for them in discussing estrangement, whether it's people or ideas that we feel a challenging separation from, or a recognition of something that's not healthy that becomes uncomfortable. You can't unknow what you know. Once you know something, it's impossible to go backwards and pretend you don't have that information. So sometimes the knowledge that comes up in situations about ourselves, about other people, about definitions, ideas, beliefs that we hold on to really tightly, there can be a level of discomfort with recognizing that maybe that's not serving us. Because usually, 99.999% of the time, that means we have to change something. That 0.0001% of the time can look to someone else and say, wow, that'd be really helpful if you change something. But at the end of the day, it's really up to us how we're going to respond to it. Whether or not somebody else makes a change is completely up to them. And Barbara, you brought up something about there being discomfort on your daughter's side because you're not responding the way that she's used to you responding from. And that also can be challenging. When we think differently and respond differently and act differently, that's uncomfortable for other people. When some of those boundaries are established, and the boundary doesn't have to be I'm not going to do this, or you're not going to do that, or you're not going to treat me that way. The boundary is just that there's a different response.
Mhm.
And that can cause its own level of conflict sometimes.
Yes, for sure.
So how do we start to shift some of those responses for ourselves? And what have you guys found with using the microdosing to quiet the mind down, to be able to see things in a different way? Like Becky was talking about, recognizing where those emotions come from, choosing something different so that A, we feel more healthy in the choices that we're making, and then B, giving others a chance to respond differently as well. Tom, you're shaking your head.
Well, goodness gracious, Charity. I mean, uh, I guess going back, you said, relationship is a connection, and estrangement seems like that would be the word you might use when there's like it's 100% disconnected. And so I have an estrangement with a couple of people in my life by choice. Um, then there's others in my life that I don't have a connection with. The relationship is just at a very minimal, low level that I wish could be more. So there's like just a difference from estrangement to maybe a little disconnect to maybe just very little disconnected, and there's just maybe a little fixing or something that needs to be put in there. So there's like all these different, not all these, I mean, I don't have like buckets of people that I have all this disconnect of some level with, but there's a few. And so I found that like with microdosing, I know that I was when I had a hot when I thought what was a good dose for me was too much, I know that there was maybe some positive, I would say more positive versus negative with that. for the fact that it really brought out thoughts of those people that I do have a disconnect with, that I do not want to have. Like they would be brought up in my mind. There would be more of awareness. I would think about them. I would ponder them. I get emotional about them. And I just was like, I can see in this discussion, so I say, oh my goodness gracious, that microdosing could be so therapeutic because it's allowing thoughts that maybe I'm just blocking to come in, and then to actually have to work on the ability of acceptance of where it's at. Whereas I think maybe for me is that I would block those disconnections because of the pain, and I would, self-medicate in an unhealthy manner with alcohol, and then and not have and not bring it in, not allow it to be there, not to actually be, not to have it be, because it's real, it's there, it is what it is at this point. Now, how do I work on acceptance, or how can I work on maybe having it be changed to where I would like to have it to be? But there's some selfishness there with it as well, because I don't know where they want it to be as well. But then that, it just requires a conversation that is not happening. And I don't know how it can happen, with a certain few folks. So that disconnect, I found that, like, now that I'm in a lower dose, and I believe is what is a better dose for me, is that it allows for some smoother, not so harsh, like just coming in and bombing me with memories and hopefulness that's just slam, slam, slam. And I just, I have to, I believe, accept what's happening. But at a lower dose, it's just a little bit calmer with it being aware, and there's an awareness there, but it's just, it's in a calmer, if that's the right word, state for me to contemplate.
Mhm.
And I think that, I've worked, there was a couple of times of the word of just sitting in it. I think for me to sit in it, for, there's got to be, again, that acceptance. Like, if I work on how can I accept where it's at, that's a way of me just not sitting in it, but sitting in it and working on it through my mind and my emotions, instead of it just, well, I'm just going to sit here and be miserable for a minute. I mean, I know that I mean, for me, I do pray a lot for those folks. I pray a lot for just goodness, and that's my way of accepting. It's my way of going about knowing that everything's still okay. But there's just, there's a lot of the unknown too, when there's not that connection. How are they doing? Are they healthy? Are they are they in a good spot in life? And not having that knowledge, then I'll pray, that for goodness for them, send some kind of energy out there that'll that I hope that they receive, and that calms me down. It gets me to a state of betterness. And you had mentioned one more thing with, not only, a connection with people, but that was really interesting when you're talking about, relationship as a connection with, things, places, maybe a connection with an emotion. I find that, I mean, I have connection with, like, roads I drive. I have connection with um, areas in the state that I travel to. There's, like, all these different connections, and so it's interesting to think about. It's just not people, and I love that. It's like we are blessed with that as human beings, to be able to have a connection almost in everything that we have in our life.
Mhm.
And that was just awesome. That I think that you brought that to forefront for me, to see that I have a beautiful connection with this lovely lady sitting next to me, but beyond the people, I you had mentioned summer, and I have a connection with like the desire to be able to go out and feel the season that we're in. There's like a connection there. So that I don't know, that's awesome to I want to go out and explore all my connections now. you know, and feel those and see those and contemplate those and I'm appreciative towards those. So I'll end it with I know that I'm so excited about the dosage that I am now on over just really the last maybe week and a half, that it does help with the connection because it gets me to a state of just flow and some peace. And I'm able to really, I've found myself like diving more into some areas in work and in life where I have this strong desire to help a little bit more and not have as much of a selfish direction with it. So a lot of good, just positive there. And I think the negative is even positive, where it's just microdosing helps bring up the thoughts and you can't just block them unless I just do something really a bad decision in order to block them. And it's like, I just think blocking is maybe just not a healthy way of going about it, and to actually allow it to happen and allow the thoughts to be there, allow everything to be in the forefront, and then to present myself to it and then proceed appropriately with it. That when I don't microdose, I want to block it all. And when I do microdose and it comes in and it's very vivid, I want to block it too. But I have a strong determination to not do that at this point, and to really help it just come in, just invite it. Like, I don't like you, but I have to invite you.
Yeah, that extended family member a little bit. Don't like you, but come on in since you're here. Let's chat. Yeah. No, Tom, thanks for sharing all of that. It's always intriguing to hear because you're so open about how you process things and very vulnerable in the way that they come up for you, and adds a lot of value to our discussions and everybody today. Um, it's really enjoyable to hear the honesty and the authenticity that comes out, because that's the reality. The reality is not the mask that we put on when we go to work or drive down the road or show up at the grocery store or even talk to other friends and family members sometimes. The reality is what's actually in our thoughts, because that is what's going to drive our behaviors. And so, to your point exactly, when we're choosing to just block something and circumvent it, it doesn't change the fact that it's there. It's like having this big orange cone sitting over the pothole. It doesn't change the fact that the pothole is right there in the middle of the road, and we see it every time. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to drive around it for safety. But when it comes to our ideas that we hold on to, if we're holding on to something, it has value to us. We don't always recognize that, but we are getting something out of it. Humans are intelligent. We do not do things that we don't get some sort of payoff for. That's why I say relationships are transactional. It doesn't diminish the value of the relationship, whatever it might be, a person with a person, an idea, a role, a thing, a season. But we need to be honest in that selfishness of it, or that self-appreciation. What are we getting out of it? What do we get out of summer? Well, we get to actually spend more time outside in Colorado anyway. We get to be outside. It's not snowing. It's not freezing. The sun feels different. The grass is growing. The trees and the flowers are blooming. There's an appreciation of nature in what summer holds. And then what do we get out of fall? The beauty. The leaves are changing. The air's a little bit crisp. If we like the holidays that are coming up, then maybe there's some anticipation of those. For people that like sports and football, that's coming, in the fall. There's just a shift. There's a shift in what we appreciate about that season. And as we go through each of the seasons, then there's a different appreciation with each of those. But when we're honest about why we're trying to escape something, it's generally because like I said earlier, it's going to require something of us in order to go through it. And so, Tom, one of the things that you brought up that I thought was really interesting is that there are people, there are relationships that you would like to, and I think everybody can relate to this, have a closer connection to, but there's something that has created a little bit of separation there, and it requires a willingness to move through that real uncomfortable separation to see if the other person also wants to have a closer relationship. And what holds us back from that? Not the conversation, but the idea that the other person might reject that. That's the discomfort. The discomfort is not the initial, hey, let's talk about this. That's just a conversation, that's words. But the discomfort is, what if they respond to me in a way that says, I don't value you and I don't value this relationship the way that you do, and so I'm not going to put in anything towards that. Then what does that mean to us? It can mean nothing. It can mean, okay, well, that's disappointing, but that's their choice. And now I know, and I can set that aside. Or we can internalize it and say, well, that must mean I'm not really valuable enough to have a relationship with, or for the other person to put some effort into. And we have to be honest about our ideas of what we hold on to with that. Or if they do accept it, then it's like, great, I'm so valuable and they want to jump in this with me. If we can exist in the mindset that whether or not the other person chooses to engage in that reciprocal relationship with us, we have the same value. Our value as a human being, our purpose on this planet, the amazingness, to use a word that probably doesn't exist, but of our existence, just the fact that each of us are here is so incredibly amazing, but we don't value that. We value how other people respond to us. Why? Because that's what our society has said is valuable. So when we come full circle back to that concept of our values are determined by our society, think about when there was no social media and all of our communities were relatively small. If you weren't home when the phone rang, then you didn't get the phone call. And the other person assumed what? You're busy. You're doing something. Instead, it's like, I know you have your phone on you 24/7. Why are you not answering me, right? Becomes a, hey, here's my message. And then it's hello, 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 and then like 95 question marks until you finally respond. Now, that's an exaggeration to some degree with some people, but also a reality for others. But the mindset is kind of there. We're accessible 24/7. Why are you not responding to me? Why? Because the message is, if you don't respond to me, you must not value whatever it is that I'm saying, or the conversation I want to have, or the idea that I'm proposing. I spent 20 years in various aspects of the sales industry, mostly in medical sales. And it was always about that relationship with the client. And if the client was not responsive, then I felt, okay, this relationship isn't valued. But what was really the goal of that? I need you to buy my product or engage in my service. But there was an understanding of it. So the relationship was defined. It's a professional relationship. There's an interaction of either I see value in you, so I'll try your product, or I don't really know about you, but I see value in the product, so I'll try your product, or I like the other sales rep better, and so I'm going to buy from them, even if I like your product, or I just like their product better. There's another option, or service. But understanding that that is human nature in all aspects. So are we willing to kind of lean into that and accept it, or are we going to stay in a state of only defining our own worth and value by how other people respond to us, or even by how our environment responds to us? I think all of us have heard at some point somebody say, oh, this other terrible thing is happening. It feels like the world is against me. Well, that's a mighty egocentric way to view your place on this planet, that the totality of the entire universe or planet would be against you as one of multi-billions of people. And I know it's a phrase, right? But that concept is there. Oh my gosh, I just washed my car and now it's raining. God hates me. Really? But we take those big things and we move them to the small. My partner didn't look at me the way that they usually do. Is everything okay? What are they thinking? Or this person that I engage in a conversation with because I want to move towards potentially a closer relationship or interaction with them just snubbed me and didn't respond. Okay, that's their choice. That doesn't diminish who I am. So some of the other things that you had touched on, Tom, that you brought up was the anxiety. You actually had mentioned it earlier in the conversation before we started the recording today, that sometimes taking a higher dose causes you to feel anxiety. And that's, I hear that from people regularly. But when we define anxiety, sometimes anxiety is, it's giving me more energy, my brain's working a little faster, I don't feel as focused, and I need to quiet that down so I can be more focused. That's one definition of anxiety. Another definition of anxiety is kind of what I took from what you were sharing about relationships, and that is, here's this thing that I see a lot of value in, and it's going to require something of me, and I don't know how I want to deal with that, and we'll define that with the same word of anxiety. So with microdosing, we can have both anxieties in different contexts. It can be that the dose is a little high, and so the colors are a little bright, things are a little fuzzy. I probably shouldn't be driving a car right now. Yep, drop that microdose. That's not a state that we want to live in. That's a little more of an existential experience, and that has to be what you're looking for to be in that state. But the anxiety that we can use as a definition of these things are coming up that are making me a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know how I want to deal with them. That is something that, to your point exactly, we sit with in acceptance. Okay, here's these things. What do I want to do with them? Do I want to deal with them right now? Do I want to set them aside and maybe say, okay, on Saturday, I'm going to think about these things and maybe I'll write down some thoughts about this relationship and how I might want to approach said concept or idea or person? Or do we recognize it and say, dang, I'm really done with all the emotion that this particular idea, topic, or person is getting. That needs to be separate from me for now. That can be a healthy estrangement
Mhm.
because it's not serving us. What do you want for your life? That's the ultimate question. Because once we decide what we want for our life, and that can look like a lot of different things, but when I ask that question, what do you want for your life? What do you want your experience on this planet to be like? What do you define as mental wealth, financial wealth, relationship wealth? Those are career wealth. Those are things that we make decisions on. But when we make decisions on those, now we have reference points. This is what I want for my life. This is where I'm going in my life. When something comes in, a thought, an idea, another person, a societal expectation, it gets measured against that reference point. Does it align? Yeah, okay, I'll hold on to that for a little while. Let's see how this goes. If it doesn't align, you know quickly when to set it aside. And holding on to everyone else's, in big theoretical quotes, everyone else's ideas of what our life should look like is taking on a burden that's just been handed off to you. You're climbing up the mountain of life, and society says, hey, carry my 150-pound pack if you don't mind, on top of yours. And we're like, yeah, please, because I just want to be a people pleaser. I just want everyone to like me. Yeah, hand that over. I will carry it. And then we're on our knees, scratching and clawing our way up this mountain that we call life. Man, when you let go of that pack, it's so much easier. And that's what psilocybin does in the brain in quieting down the areas of expectation and ideas that we've allowed to be put in there to say, not my pack to carry, friend.
Mhm.
Yeah. If I may, um, interestingly about my dog. I had a vet appointment and I took both my dogs in just for their routine stuff, but my one had been injured that weekend. And he gave me all this information about my dogs that was terrible. Like everything that could be wrong was kind of wrong. And kind of to your point, I was like, that's to me, that's too much. I just can't right now. I had to go back to work. I was actually traveling for the weekend for a wedding. It was on a Thursday. And I was just like, ugh, no. And so I said, nope, not right now. I just can't right now. Put it aside. And I decided I will return to this when I'm back from my trip and I will figure it out then. And I put something in place. I scheduled a call with my friend's daughter who just graduated from vet school to kind of get her thoughts on stuff so that I knew like there's something I can pick this up with some relief somewhat possibly next week. And so I did put it aside, and throughout the whole weekend, every now and then my mind would go to it and I'm like, nope, next week. So I was able to enjoy the weekend with my family and the wedding, and I came back. And here's what I found interesting, and I wrote it in a review. I don't know if you guys posted it, Charity. I don't even know, but I feel like if my brain is a ball of yarn, it's been so tight and so restricted in its ability to think differently. And I feel like with the microdosing, it loosens and it allows me to pull at different parts and test things and feel things in a different way. Like, so with this guy, with my dog, I just started to kind of investigate these different things, and not in any kind of intense, I need to do this, not a regimented way. I was just like, let me go down this avenue. So, I got this opinion and let me go down this avenue. And before I knew it, I had a solution that worked. Like, oh, and it was through inquiry, and it was gentle, and it wasn't intense and like, it was like, I can figure this out. Right? Like, I can figure this out. And I did. And it was just like, oh, wow, that was way easier. I mean, we're dealing with it. I'm going to be dealing with it, like from a recovery standpoint, but I allowed it to like come through in a more organic kind of way than kind of trying to force a solution that wouldn't come that way. It just couldn't come that way. And he's actually crying at the door. So he's going to go in my house. So I'm going to leave for just a minute. I'm sorry to talk and then run 1 second.
You're good. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's interesting that Barbara's saying all that. Because like that ball of yarn thing, that was an interesting analogy that she was saying, because I agree with the having the right dose in microdosing does allow for me to contemplate things in a more open manner. Sometimes it gets a little artistic manner, like I can think a little bit more out of the box, maybe with how to solve a problem or whatever, and going and tuning it into the anxiety part. It's like, I think I'd mentioned on one of our meetings, like in the past, that a very wise man once told me that anxiety is just essentially a level of fear of having some kind of belief that something's going to happen that I don't want to have happen. And he stated it like that simple to me, and it like really hit home. I was like, oh, well, that's all it is. I don't have to freak out. It's just I have a belief that something's going to happen that I don't want, and I don't want it for various reasons, and I have a belief for various reasons it's going to happen. So most of the time, those reasons of having me have that belief are like totally made up. Like I completely went down roads that were like in make-believe land. But I believe them. And so microdosing, then I know that it allows me to then untie, maybe using Barbara's yarn, to untie that reason to have that belief. It's like, how real is that reason? Where does it come from? Did I just totally make that up? And now I'm just putting myself in this panic, I mean, And then why do I really not want that to happen? Maybe I do, maybe it'll be a learning experience that I just need to go and accept. And so I really appreciated her saying that, because it does it, like, it loosens up, and it goes, and you can go, my mind can go into some directions that are allowing me to then contemplate, how real is this? Where is this at? So yeah, that was nice.
Absolutely. That reminder too that anxiety is rooted in fear. What we call anxiety is basically the physical manifestation of the underlying fear that's there, and the fear is connected to a threatening, potentially known outcome. We don't fear what we don't know. It's not known. We fear what we've experienced or what we know can be experienced. And that's where that fear becomes much more ingrained. So if it is that fear of being rejected or invalidated or told that we're stupid or not accepted or the relationship not invested in, those are known. And that's where that churning stomach and the physical manifestation of that belief system is rooted in that fear. And allowing that to be there, recognizing it for what it is, and then deciding, am I going to let this idea hold me back? Or am I going to move towards what I want for my life? And to your point exactly, going through that could be exactly what needs to happen. Going through it is what is going to lead to a healthier outcome one way or the other, because the outcome will be known and you'll have made the choice to go through it. So anytime we recognize that fear, anytime we're sitting in a place of discomfort, that's a question I use regularly. What is the fear? What is it that's causing me to be so hesitant to move in this direction? What is the real fear, the root fear? The fear isn't not getting the job or not getting the sale. The fear is, what does that mean about me? How is somebody else going to interpret that? How am I going to interpret that as a belief about the idea of myself because of that? So I appreciate everybody's time. I'm going to end the recording, and for those of you that want to stay on for a few minutes afterwards, you're welcome to. For those of you that are listening online, thank you so much for joining our conversation today. We'd love to have you join our groups in person. Growyourownthoughts.org is the website, and you can jump on the calendar. Dates, times, and Zoom links are listed there.